Hello and welcome to the Crimson Stitchery, a video channel about making all things that are beautiful and useful. My name is Anushka and you can find me elsewhere online as A Sour Telling, that's A Sour Telling, and that is my username on Instagram and also on Ravelry. And on Ravelry we also have a Ravelry group, so do go over there and join in for a bunch of discussions, chats, there's threads on different topics, and you'll find yourself in really good company. Links for anything that I mention in this video, as with all of my video, are in the down bar here on YouTube, so just click on the arrow below to see the show notes if you're interested. I'm really happy to be recording this episode because it's been a few weeks since I've recorded a kind of up-to-date podcast chat for you guys, and in this episode I've got some knitting and some mending, and in Conversational Threads I'll be catching you up on what's been happening in my Crimson Corner, and also doing a little book review that fits with some of the themes that we've been discussing in recent weeks here at the Crimson Stitchery. So let's get to it. My knitting basket is overflowing. There's a lot going on, there's a lot packed in there, so yeah, there's sort of finished things I've got to show you, some dormant things, and also some stuff that I need to be getting on with that I'll mention briefly as well. But firstly, I have got a finished object, which is what I'm wearing. I have finished knitting my Jamieson tunic, which is my entry for the Vintage Shetland Spring KAL, the knit along that I've been running on this channel and also over on Instagram with Susan Crawford, the author of the Vintage Shetland project. And yeah, I finished my entry, which is this burgundy version of the Jamieson sweater, so let me tell you about it. Just a quick notice for you as well. People from all around the world have joined in with the Vintage Shetland Spring KAL, which is fabulous because this is a really low-key, low stakes, low pressure knit along, just to have some company with each other to crack on with knitting some of the beautiful projects from this book. And I started it because I discovered on Ravelry that there were actually hardly any finished projects listed, and I really wanted to encourage people to knit something from the book if they already owned it, and also I just really wanted some company. So far, I think out of all of the participants, I seem to be the person that has finished their project, but it's really not a problem at all. This is not a race in any way, and it's absolutely not too late to join in. So I called it the Vintage Shetland Spring KAL because I started in March and I was planning on running it for 6 months through to September, which represents spring in both hemispheres of the world. But if we get to September and people want more time, then that's going to be no problem at all, and we can just extend the knit along as and when is necessary. So what I wanted to mention is that there's people around the world that have expressed interest in this knit along. However, this is a hardback book that's really jam-packed. It is probably about 4 centimetres wide in its spine, and you know, it's a heavy book and it's huge is what I'm trying to get across. So the shipping is expensive, it's quite expensive. Now, I originally backed this book many years ago in Susan Crawford's crowdfunding campaign, so I essentially paid for the book, probably shipping was included, I can't remember, it was years ago, and then it just kind of arrived by the time it was ready. However, just recently, Susan has released an ebook version of the Vintage Shetland project, which is a pattern book, so it only contains the patterns that are in the book, and obviously it's downloadable and printable, and it's only available through her website. So I will pop a link in the show notes below for you to check that out. But if this is a knit along that you had your eye on and you just weren't able to make the leap into purchasing the hard copy of the book, buying the ebook obviously is much cheaper and is a great solution. It does only contain the patterns. It doesn't contain any of their essays and, you know, the other historical information that's available in the hard copy of the book. And if you are still interested in having the hard copy of the book but you're still a little bit on the fence, do check out my past catalogue of videos. I'll put a link below. I have an episode where I make a lot of suggestions about how you might obtain the physical copy of the book if ordering it straight away is a little bit beyond your means. For example, I placed an order of, for the book through my university library. I made a catalogue request and that was granted, and we now actually have a copy of the Vintage Shetland project at the University of the Arts London, which is where I attend. So if you wanted to check out the book and you're a UAL staff or student, of which there are obviously thousands and thousands, maybe there are a few watching my podcast, you are able to check out the book from the library if you just do a catalogue search. Or if you're an external researcher, you are able to make an appointment with UAL libraries. You just have to email them, and you're allowed to spend the day there and browse books, you know, publications, resources, archival resources in situ. So you just have to stay in the room of the library and you're allowed to browse it. And, you know, read it there and take notes and use it as study material. So, you know, if you are able to put a catalogue request in for a library, actually the book has potential to reach a much wider audience. So it's kind of like win-win all round if you're obviously successful in doing that. And I was, because I go to an arts university which has, you know, various different textile departments and cultural studies departments in the different colleges. So obviously it was a really good fit for my university. But I'm sure that it's possible to argue the case for this book because, as I mentioned before, it fits across a lot of different categories, including women's history, social history, Scotland and Shetland history, so on. So, you know, if you have a history department in your university, it's worth a stab. Okay, so let's get into my project. So I knit Jamieson, which was kind of confusing because Jamieson appears to be a really common name on the Isles of Shetland, because, you know, there's the two different types of Jamieson yarns. Why is everybody called Jamieson? I don't know. But according to the research that Susan's done in the book, this was named after Christina Jamieson, who was a suffragette in the Shetland Isles, which is really exciting and somehow fits really nicely with my own personality too. So yeah, here we go, Jamieson. I'll just kind of pop up and give you a look at the jumper. So it's knit in a really dark burgundy. It's looking quite bright on camera at the moment. It's really just the perfect shade of burgundy because it's quite brownish. It's more like the tones here as opposed to the sort of glowing red. It's really a true burgundy, kind of dream burgundy, and it's got this gorgeous diamond lace panel around the hips, some broken rib, and that is repeated here on the sleeves. So that's that. I made quite a few modifications to this pattern. The two main modifications being, in this armhole section, I was knitting it and knitting it, and basically the armhole looked really massive, so I left out one repeat, which is about 1 inch, and I knit one of the smaller sizes. So I think that's something to really bear in mind and keep an eye on, because this armhole is, you know, it's the perfect length. The armhole's got the perfect amount of ease because my armpit kind of stops there and the armhole stops there. So there's a good, you know, 2 inches of ease in the armhole, which befits it being a tunic. It's not tight at all, but if I'd knit another one, it might have even been 2 pattern repeats, it would have just been really low and saggy. So I'm quite glad that I did that. So that's something to keep an eye on, particularly if you're knitting in the medium and larger sizes, because yeah, you don't want to have an armhole that's too big and baggy, because it will just create all of this extra weight and heaviness in the fabric. So that's not what I was going for. So I shortened that, and it doesn't seem to have made much difference visually. And then the other modification I did was that the sleeves, I can't quite remember, I think that they were written for decreases to go in, but I actually did the opposite. I did some increases. If you can see, you can kind of see the line going down there. I did some increases and then ended up doing, I think, at least 1 extra repeat of the chart. Might have been 2, honestly I can't remember now. But yeah, so then that created much more of a flowing tunic shaped sleeve, and they are kind of bracelet length sleeves, if you will, as well. So although they're much wider than what was written in the pattern, they're short enough so that they don't get in the way too badly. So yeah, I'm absolutely delighted with this knit. I'll mention the yarn again. So I didn't use the recommended yarn, which is something that I rarely do, to be honest with you. So I think that the recommended yarn was a Shetland 2-ply, so I didn't do that. Instead, I used a totally different yarn. I used a sport weight worsted spun and like an 8-ply or 6-ply, so it wasn't the 2-ply, you know, rustic feeling woolen spun, fluffy and light kind of yarn. It was the opposite. It was sleek, it was slick, and the result of it is that as you can see, it's got this amazing drape and hang, and it's got this absolutely incredible stitch definition, which is great especially on a darker garment. So I'm super happy with that, and I bought the yarn last July, and I bought it for myself as a birthday present, so I'm really glad that I have managed to knit up the yarn that was in my stash in less than a year. And I bought the yarn when I was on holiday for my birthday trip to Porto in Portugal, and this is the label for the yarn. It was a shop called Lopo Javier, and the yarn is Phoebus. And it's from a little haberdashery. I believe that the word for haberdashery in Portuguese is retrosaria. So it was retrosaria, Lopo Javier and Co. And the shop is in a building with the original interiors from 1934, and the yarn labels reflect that. It's this beautiful gold and taupe coloured yarn label that is printed in an Art Deco style. Totally gorgeous. It looks like a mirror or a piece of panelling with some, you know, kind of Art Nouveau style scrolls as well. And it's 100% Portuguese wool. So I really couldn't recommend this yarn enough. It was a total dream to work with, like really a dream, and it wasn't very expensive at all. So yeah, real recommendation there. It's quite an old-fashioned shop, but the saleswoman did speak some English, and she told me that, you know, they deliver. You just have to, I think, email them or call them up and discuss it. They do have a website as well, though it's currently seems to be down for maintenance, but I will put some links below, and they're on Facebook. So it's really, really worth checking out, especially if you are planning a trip to Porto or doing some traveling in Portugal. It's a shop that you should get to because it's very, very special, and their colour range of their own yarns is totally stunning. So yay! Finished my jumper. Onwards with knitting. I have only worked on one thing since the last episode. I have been really busy. I have been quite stressed, and so as a result of that, my Magnolia sweater has grown like a total beast, because last time that we spoke, I had just done the top portion of the yoke, which had already come on really quickly, and it's almost finished. I'm on the second sleeve. So yeah, again, it's a dark red. This one's in Holst Super Soft in Venetian red, but it is, you know, it's related to my burgundy, but it is quite different because this one is much more brown, the one that I'm wearing, and you know, the Venetian red is really much more of a true deep bluish red, so that is fabulous, and I just can't believe how quickly this has come along. So like I said, I have been quite stressed, and I've been procrastinating, kind of putting my stress in the knitting, which is what I've spoken about before. But I think, to be honest with you, the main reason is that I've held the yarn double, and I've knitted it at a gauge of 19 stitches per 10 centimetres, which for me is quite large because, for instance, this one was 25 or 26 stitches per 10 centimetres, and I tend to knit 4-ply weight garments for various reasons. Firstly, because I like the sort of vintage historical styles, and most patterns from, you know, the 1950s and earlier were knitted with 4-ply weight, generally starting at 26 stitches per 4 inch, could be easily 28, 30, 32. Yeah, very easily. So that's one reason. The other reason is that 4-ply weight yarn is a lot cheaper. You can make a garment for a lot less than if you're knitting with chunky or even Aran weight yarn. But this one, because it's Holst, and for various reasons that I've discussed in my videos on Holst Super Soft yarn, this was really cheap as well. And this sweater, I mean, I bought a 500-gram cone, and I doubt I'm even using half of it, so this sweater is costing me, you know, something like £14, if that. So buying kind of wholesale-ish yarn or yarn off a cone and holding it double is a great way to achieve a heavier gauge at an affordable rate. So yeah, highly recommend that. I'm thinking of filming a third video in my series about Holst Super Soft because I was considering machine washing this to get the spinning oil out. So if you're interested in seeing a third video about machine washing Holst Super Soft, please let me know in the comments down below. In my second video in Holst Super Soft, I hand washed my swatches and I spoke about that quite extensively. So I was wondering if you'd be interested in the machine washing process. And also, if you have any other questions that I didn't manage to cover about Holst Super Soft that you'd like to see in a part 3, just let me know in the comments down below. Several people have asked things about elasticity and ribbing, and I can address that in more detail in the specific Holst video. I've got some really great feedback about those videos, so thank you for your comments, it's really appreciated. And I was really happy to make those videos, bit of a change from, you know, the normal podcast, but those videos are there to act as a resource for you guys and as a learning tool. So, you know, enjoy them and please feel free to share them, spread the love around the internet, because as I said, I have noticed that people have a lot of questions about this yarn and they maybe feel a little bit less confident about purchasing this yarn compared to, you know, stuff that just comes ready balled and labelled up perfectly in the shop. But it's got an amazing colour range and it's at a great price point. So I'm really there to just help you empower everybody in their knitting and textile decisions as much as possible. So yeah, that's the Magnolia sweater by Camilla Vad. And that's really all that I've been knitting on. I haven't touched my socks once again. My flame top, which was the black cotton top, I've put something like 2 rows on, so it's just a black cotton blob. But you know, now that it is, well, I was going to say now that it's warming up, but actually the weather is completely all over the place as usual. It's been so windy for the last week, like horrifically windy, and everybody is suffering so badly from hay fever because obviously the gale force winds are like pulling all of the pollen off the trees and into everybody's, you know, nasal cavities, which is really horrible. And yeah, it's been pretty unpleasant. So we're still kind of waiting for true summer. It was super hot last weekend, or the weekend before last, I should say, but I was sick, so I couldn't enjoy it. I was just like really hot and bothered, so that wasn't very much fun at all. But yeah, waiting for some summer motivation to get cracking on my little summer cotton top for this year. But mending, I finally have some mending to share with you. And for new viewers and new subscribers, normally as well as knitting, I feature a regular mending segment for this podcast called Mending Stories, because I just want to encourage everybody to join in on mending as a process and as a practice in maintaining our wardrobes and our handmade wardrobes regularly. But I haven't done any mending, or I haven't been doing any mending for a while because, as I've mentioned several times, I've been really stressed. But I've got some now, so let's go through it. Firstly, this little cashmere cardigan, it's quite sweet. It's got these kind of butterfly floaty sleeves that belongs to my granny, and it got attacked by, dun dun dun, the M word, moths. So I just did a little bit of darning there. I didn't have a purple in the same colour, so it's a darker and colder purple, but I just went in there with the patching. So I'll give that to her. Hopefully you won't notice it too much because it's quite high up on the shoulder, the darned patchings, but you know, she wears quite a lot of scarves, so hopefully she can just drape a silk scarf around her shoulders and it will cover up the mending, because, you know, she's not going to be into visible mending on, you know, this gorgeous little sweet cashmere cardigan. She'll do visible mending when she has to do like big ugly patches on my granddad's jeans or the toddler cousin's jeans and stuff like that. But for herself, she would obviously like something a bit more refined, so she'll just have to disguise it. So that one, and then I had another little bits of darning on this little t-shirt, which is one of my favourite t-shirts. There's just something about it that I absolutely love, something about the cut, the colour, the drape of the fabric, and it's a few years old now and it's got a little bit pilled and bobbly on the surface, although I do wash it in a net bag on delicate setting most of the time. But yeah, despite that, it's got a little bit of surface pilling, but I'm not ready to let go of it yet, and it's quite a delicate knit fabric. and it had got some holes in it. So there weren't moth holes, but they were just like little holes where the t-shirt's probably caught on something, or just through washing, kind of the fabric started to break down. So I did a really simple mend on this. I didn't do a proper darn. So what I do with tiny pinholes or like tiny moth holes is I just start stitching around the hole, and then after stitching it a while, I turn it into blanket stitch, and then as I blanket stitch around, I start to catch the stitching and then end up filling the hole with thread. So I've got one there that I did in this darker sewing thread, and then the second one I did was on the back, which I did with a lighter sewing thread because I didn't have the right colour of golden, browny, maybe diarrhea yellow. And I wasn't sure whether the darker or lighter would be a better option, and I think actually the darker one is better. Somehow it just seems a bit less noticeable. But the mended, little mended circles are kind of dotted round towards the hem, so it's not very noticeable overall, and I'm really pleased to add that one back into rotation. The next few mends I've got are pretty simple. I was given this absolutely stunning crochet cardigan as a hand-me-down by someone who was, you know, clearing out the house of someone who had either moved or passed away. And I get a lot of clothing and bits of knitting and haberdashery and stuff through this. I always have done, to a point where now I actually say no. I say no, and I got offered this bag of stuff and I gave nearly everything away apart from this cardigan, just because it was so pretty, and I thought, you know, it's not 100% my style in terms of the cut, but I just wanted to keep it at least for now. Yeah, gorgeous work. It's handmade by someone. There's no labels in it or anything. Just can't. And there's not a way of mechanising crochet. Crochet is always handmade. You know, when you see it mass produced or factory produced as well, it's still made by people's hands. And all that had happened there was that a button had fallen off. This cardigan's got these lovely mother of pearl buttons. So yeah, button fallen off, so I just stitched it back on. Actually, I have a really good method of sewing on buttons very strongly and very fast. So if you're interested in seeing a tutorial about my way of sewing on buttons, please let me know in the comments down below. And then one more bit of mending, these olive green culottes that I think I've worn on the podcast already, and all that had happened was that the fastenings were coming off, and at this point I've mended nearly all of the points of the fastenings. These culottes fasten with quite large and chunky trouser hooks that I'm quite familiar with because we use this kind of thing, or I used to use this kind of thing when I was a costume maker, but I'm not anymore. Now I am a research student. So yeah, at this point I have mended nearly all of the original stitching because it was such poor quality, and my mends are quite old and I did them quite quickly, but again I know quite a very good and secure method that is used professionally for stitching on hooks and bars. So if you're interested in those kind of tutorials, more like practical making applications, just let me know. I've got a list of different video ideas that I'd like to make, but I really welcome your input into that too, so that we can keep curating and developing the Crimson Stitchery into a place that everybody enjoys being in. So yeah, 4 little small bits of mending to go, and that was all done by hand because, as I've mentioned, I still haven't managed to dust off my sewing machine, and I do mean dust it off. And I think that part of that reason is because I don't have a specific sewing space in this flat. I live in a 1-bedroom flat with my partner. We both work and have creative pursuits that take up a lot of space, and I share a desk, so I work from home quite a lot of the time. So in the day I'll use the desk for typing, and then in the evenings, or you know, whenever it's his turn, he'll use the desk for music production, and I will, you know, sit on the sofa and type on my laptop or whatever. Before I lived in this flat, I had my own personal desk. I had my computer on one side and my sewing machine on the other side. And let me think, when we lived in another flat, I didn't have a desk at all actually, but I used to sew on the kitchen tables, and it was quite a huge kitchen table, so I was able to take up quite a lot of room, and when we had meals just push it to one side, whereas we live in a much smaller flat now because it's 1 bedroom, it's just for the 2 of us. Those are the various sacrifices that you make. I've mentioned my small flat quite a lot of times on this podcast. And I think it's worth doing that because there is this idea of this kind of perfect, you know, Martha Stewart / in this country, it's Kirsty Allsop. And it's just this idea that, you know, in order to be good at making things and crafts, you need to have this huge, amazing, light-filled space in your gigantic kitchen with the gigantic kitchen island, you know, looking out onto the manicured grass of your garden, and that you have servants mowing the lawn. And, you know, it's this idea that you have to have that kind of lifestyle. But that's completely ludicrous. I know this for a fact because both historically and, you know, still today in the contemporary era, people who produce amazing things, you know, craftspeople who do amazing work professionally, can do that work in such limited circumstances and on such limited budgets. Like, I have been to so many artist studios that were tiny, and people do amazing work from one small desk with one set of shelves and a notice board above them, and they just go in and they crack on and do that work. And similarly, I have been in professional workrooms, I am not going to say where the space was so small, you had like 8 people sitting round a workbench that when I was at university, like 2 people took up that amount of space, but like in the professional workroom, 8 people took up that amount of space. So anyway, that's kind of why I always laugh and joke about my tiny flat, because it doesn't matter what your circumstances are, where you live, whether or not you fit these like gorgeous idealized lifestyles. And if you are lucky enough to have that, then, you know, that is amazing. Good for you, but I'm not really addressing you because I feel like there's so much material out there that does address you. I'm specifically at this point addressing people that, you know, have a lower level of disposable income, who live in a tiny flat, who live in a flat share, live at home with multiple generations of family members. You can still make amazing stuff. You can still make beautiful stuff that makes your life better and makes you feel better. And just don't worry about all the kind of marketing paraphernalia that exists out there. So I've mentioned several times, my aim and ambition with the Crimson Stitchery is to make a welcoming and safe and beautiful space for everybody to enjoy, regardless of who you are and where you come from. Sorry, that turned into a little bit of a spiel there, but yeah. Okay, just looking at my sewing basket, it's so full, and I'll just quickly mention some other things that are in here, or a knitting basket rather. So I've got this pair of socks, which I haven't worked on in a while, which will be my second sock pattern, but I'll probably have more time to work on that over the summer. So I'll try and get back to those and hopefully discuss them with you a bit more next time. Then I've got a half-made Linga, and the Linga is an Indian outfit for unmarried women, and it's typically what women wear to a wedding. So in terms of Indian dress, you might be a bit more familiar with a sari, which I've been informed is meant to be for married women, and a Linga is for unmarried women. And what it is, it's basically the same kind of really tightly fitting, sexy crop top that you have with a sari, but rather than all of the pleating that goes on with the fabric and then that goes over the shoulder, you have a separate floor-length dramatic skirt, and then you have a separate tunic, which is a shawl. Long story short, my best friend from high school is getting married. She is Indian, British Indian, and her partner is also Indian, but he's American, he's from the States. So they're going all out with the wedding. They're actually having 3 wedding ceremonies, and this year is the first one. It's the civil wedding ceremony, which will be held locally, local to where we both live and where I grew up, and get all of the legalities underway, and then the religious ceremony will be next year. And she basically said that we were all welcome to wear Indian dress whilst hinting that it would be great, although not compulsory. And I was like, yeah, I've always wanted to wear Indian dress, yay! Super excited, like, about the Mending, everything. So I'm going to be one of the bridesmaids for the religious ceremony next year, for which she'll be sorting out the outfits, but for the civil one, she's not providing it, fair enough. So, you know, long story short, we went clothes shopping a few weeks ago and it was so exhausting and really expensive, so I decided that it would be a good option actually to try and make my own Linga. It's not that difficult. It's a fitted crop top and it's a floor length A-line skirt with a lot of twirl, but even so, that would still be very, very expensive to buy, you know, the beautiful fabric that I wanted. So what I ended up doing was buying what's called a semi-stitched Linga. So it's kind of half made up by the company and you basically stitch it up to fit you. And I actually wanted one that was quite simple and wasn't too dominated by the brocade and all the gold trim. So I got one that it's got really beautiful trimmings on the top, and the skirt is plain, and I didn't spend very much money on it, so the skirt actually is not great quality, so I need to think about how to make that work. But the top, the embroidery has come out really nicely. Here's a close-up, and yeah, I've gone for this true Barbie pink. Well, no, it's more going towards a fuchsia, and my friend is wearing more of a brighter kind of middle pink, and I'm going for much darker and richer pinks. And she was super happy because she was like, oh, you love all of the Punjabi colours, the different types of pinks, the deep reds, the burgundies, the oranges, the gold, like those are all Punjabi colours, and they're all my favourite colours too, so she was super happy about that, and we were totally like in sync and away from pastels. So you can see that the embroidery is in the shape of a top, so I just need to, like, you know, tack it down, figure out how to finish the armholes, the sides. I'll probably make it without any sleeves. It'll just be a little sleeveless little tank, if you like, and then cut a back from the rest of the fabric there, and then figure out how to make the skirt a bit more beautiful, because as I said, it's completely plain, which is fine, it's what I wanted, but I only spent 20 quid on this semi-stitched Linga, and when we were shopping, I saw a beautiful one that was in much higher quality fabric. So this one isn't a very, very thin raw silk, but I saw one in a really heavy, lustrous Duchess silk satin that obviously was way more expensive, and I loved it, but it's a one-time outfit for me because I don't know when the next time is that I'll be attending an Indian wedding that's quite traditional. I have another friend that's getting married from the same group of high school friends who's getting married in November, but she is not going trad at all. Like she's having a Western wedding. She's wearing a white wedding dress, whereas this friend is going. Everything is pink. It's the pink wedding, and I'm helping her out with sorting out the flowers, and I'm essentially designing the flora because she's got way too much to think about. So hey girl, if you're watching, I know sometimes you check in, but yeah, I haven't done it yet. I won't be naked. There'll be something. Don't worry. Don't worry, don't stress, go and do a face mask. Don't worry about me. So yeah, anyway, that's the top, and then this is the tunic, which has got the same nice motifs of gold embroidery, but it's quite simple. It's embroidered on a net, which is pretty common, to be honest with you, but obviously if you were going for the much more expensive ones, it would probably be a lace rather than a net. But I did still see a lot of net, even amongst like the higher end versions of Lingas, and it's just got some pink and gold trim. So this is really huge. So this is what goes over your shoulder. And then you've got like the crop top, your midriff shows, and you've got the floor length skirt. So yeah, it's going to be really nice. So I'll keep you posted on that as the progress goes. And yeah, I need to think a bit creatively about that, as I said. Okay, I've got a massive pile of stuff here, but let's move on and go into conversational threads. So this week I just want to continue the kind of discussions that we've been having recently around health and best practices. And thank you so much to everybody who commented and messaged and sent me kind words about my health and empathised and shared stories about your own health developments and journeys. It's really sweet, it's really kind. What I was aiming to do with sharing all of that stuff was to raise awareness, and I think that I managed to do that from what you guys have said to me back. And I also discovered loads of things, like a vitamin D deficiency could be so severe as to lead to osteoporosis. And the point that I was really trying to make by telling you my story was that I thought that I was feeling physical pain from like an external injury, from an external minor injury, like due to a fall, like, you know, a sprain, bruising and all of that kind of stuff. But it was actually much more deeper seated. It was internal, and it came from a vitamin deficiency that was easily solved. But I would have very easily have just dismissed it and been like, oh, I should just ice my hand and not do any knitting and not play any piano for a little bit and it will get better. But actually it was quite different. So if you have any twinges, if you feel a little bit off in any way, go to your doctor and don't be afraid to insist on a blood test or multiple blood tests, as it were, because that's what I had to have. Like, she pulled so many vials of blood out of me. It was so painful. I think I've got quite a low pain threshold when it comes to pain. My mum is always incredibly dismissive of me because, you know, she's given birth 3 times and I haven't. So yeah, go to your doctor, get it checked out, take it seriously. So I had a big exam last week, and that followed loads of other stuff that's been going on that I've alluded to in my podcasts, and I just ended up completely crashing out last weekend from a mixture of flu and exhaustion and really bad hay fever, and I basically couldn't move all weekend, which sucked. And I am just so sick of being sick, and I really want to make some changes in my life and develop better practices for managing my own health and also better eating practices. And I've been quite intrigued about herbal medicines and medicinal properties of plants for quite a long time. To be honest with you, since my youth, I've been into gardening for a really, really long time. But this is only the second time in my adult life that I've had a garden that I've been actively growing and managing in, because I had some gardens in my, you know, university days when I was like 18, but we never did anything in them. But yeah, so it's only as I've got older that I've got back into actively growing herbs and growing plants that I was really into in my childhood when I was like 7 years old. And I've tried many times to read about herbalism and failed, probably because of the resources that I was looking at. They were quite dry, there was lots of Latin, there were lots of lists, and when it came to preparing the remedies, the lotions and the potions, if you will, they weren't things that I wanted to make. Like, it just wasn't very appealing somehow. And also probably I was younger, so I wasn't suffering from the same kind of things that happen to you as you get older, like, you know, sunspots and, I don't know, wrinkles and whatever else, or like, you know, recurring problems of flu and exhaustion and depression and whatnot, you know, like that. I guess when you're a kid, ideally you have family that kind of look after you and keep an eye on your health. But my interest in herbalism was really cemented a few years ago when I was living in Stockholm, and for a short period of time I had a flat share with a girl who was doing her master's degree in pharmacology, and she was doing these incredible experiments in the lab, which were all to do with stem cell research, like, so just amazing. And that's what she was doing by day. But what I found was really interesting, oh, and by the way, she was Italian and we were both doing an exchange for a semester in Stockholm. And what I found really interesting was, you know, she was a complete scientist. Like, she measured everything, you know, down to the most precise, you know, second and all of that. But she practiced herbal medicine. You know, she made tisanes, you know, herbal kind of teas that she brewed, and she knew all about the medicinal properties of plants. So she knew the history of all of the drugs and what plants were used to make drugs that are used in hospital medicines. She was so knowledgeable, and for me, that was the first time that I had met someone who was a scientist, you know, with academic scientific rigor, that was so open and interested in the herbal medicinal properties of plants, because my previous experience with people who did like herbal remedies and home remedies was the opposite. It was unscientific, it was like folklore, it was, if you like, old wives' tales, you know what I mean, like kind of word of mouth sort of things, where you sort of hear this and you hear that, and this will probably be good for this and this will probably be good for that. And obviously, you know, it's backed up in herbal books, but meeting my flatmate who was a scientist and actually said, oh, you know, valerian is a plant that's good for treating depression and insomnia, which is what I have suffered from quite a bit, and you know, you get it from here and it's used in this drug and it's used in this drug and it's been used historically, you know, by the Romans who gave it to their soldiers, according to her, to kind of keep them going as they went around Europe and Africa creating Roman Empire. So yeah, moving on from that. So I've tried to, as I said, I've tried to teach myself bits of herbalism before, but it's never quite cemented in. And then now that I'm doing my PhD, I met my friend Kim, who has appeared on this channel. If you've watched my video about my trip to the Economic Botany collection at Kew Gardens, Kim was actually the researcher who invited me to go and view the textiles, the plant-based textiles that they have in their collection. And Kim is also a medical herbalist. She's a scientist, she has a scientific background, although her PhD is about the history of herbal medicine. And I finally got round to buying her book. So Kim runs a company called Handmade Apothecary. They are very active on Instagram with educational posts, and she also does workshops, talks and herbal walks where she takes groups of people around outdoor areas in London and teaches them about what the weeds actually are in terms of herbs and the medicinal properties. Super fascinating. And so I'm just going to briefly talk about this book. This is an honest and unbiased review. Kim is my friend, but I bought this book because I've just been wowed by her knowledge from what I've learned in person and also what she shares on Instagram. She is so generous. Like, she is, honestly, she's a mine and a wealth of information, and it just pours out of her. You know, she is not stingy about it at all, even though she is a business person. I said to her, you're an entrepreneur. And she was like, oh, no one's ever called me that before. I was like, yes, you're an entrepreneur. But she is so passionate and, as I said again, generous. And I felt like it was high time that I bought her book, which I did with my own money. So it's called The Handmade Apothecary Healing Herbal Remedies, and it's the first of 2 books that she's published with her business partner, Vicky. And I'll pop a link to this down below so that you can check it out yourself. And yeah, like I said, it's unbiased because I bought it with my own money. She didn't know. She was very touched that I'd done that. And I've had a little flick through and a read, and honestly it is wonderful because it is so accessible and it's interesting, and the way that it's written, photographed and displayed, it just draws you in, which is what I really think we need for, you know, gardening, herbal medicine, herbal remedies, growing your own, like having houseplants. These are all themes that until like probably 10 years ago was seen as quite like niche and old-fashioned, and as if you had to be like a very particular certain type of hippie slash witch. Just joking, to practice. Totally joking. I think I would have been a witch in a past life, but actually probably not, because I think I would have been a man in a past life, because if I was a woman I would have been assassinated by now because I'm so bolshy. But anyway, does that make sense to you? I think it suffered from like an image problem, like houseplants were for, you know, crazy little old ladies like my grandma, literally. Whereas now I think it's much more widely known, the many different health and holistic benefits of connecting with nature, essentially. And like I said, I've previously, you know, and literally as a 7-year-old child, I've tried to read herbal books, you know, with like little illustrations, and the font is tiny and all the information is so dense and packed in, and it's a wealth of information, but it feels like there's a bit of a barrier to accessing that information. Whereas this is like fresh and vibrant, it's nicely laid out, there's lots of beautiful photographs, there's lots of white space on the page, and, you know, I think the fact that there's photos rather than illustrations, it's somehow easier to recognize things. and find them in the wild, because it's not like an artist's interpretation, which again is not to diss in any way botanical illustrators. Obviously they're doing amazing jobs, but for a complete amateur like myself, for someone who's coming from a base point of so much enthusiasm but so little knowledge about this kind of stuff, it's just so helpful to have photos rather than drawings. And then, you know, when you study it a bit more and you know what to recognize and how to read the illustrations, obviously then the illustrations are an incredible resource and an amazing, beautiful historical resource too. But I hope that that makes sense. And the other thing that's great is that you know, it's the way that it's divided up, the kind of body issues that she talks about, like, or they rather, like muscle pains, back pains, cramp, that's something that knitters suffer from, stuff about women's health in different ways, anemia, hot palpitations, high blood pressure. That's one that I'm always banging on about in my family, people's blood pressure. And the recipes are achievable, very simple to make. The book is beautiful and makes you want to engage with it. You know, here's a whole page about rosemary, with photos, with the balm, a hair oil, actions, things that it does to you, indications like things that are happening to your body that might suggest that you need to use it, basically. You know, historical little facts about the herbs, tips about how to use it, and then recipes for what to do with them. So I am really looking forward to reading this as bedtime reading. It's obviously available as an ebook too, but it's a really gorgeous object. It's square, the paper is matte, the colours are so vibrant, and I'm looking forward to reading it before bed, as I said, as a way to have less screen time, which is something that I definitely need to do, and just kind of enjoy slowly taking the information in, as well as kind of specifically referring to it. And just to make one last point about this book as a resource is the fact that I showed it to my grandparents, with whom I'm very close, as you will have gathered, and who are the gardeners that taught me everything I know about gardening, plus a bit from the telly. And they really loved it, in particular my granddad, who is from that generation of older men who never pay a compliment about anything. I'm sure that you can empathise. I'm sure that you've got like a grandfather, an uncle, or like a brother or someone, you know, they're just like, oh yeah, that's all right. Oh yeah, that's right. You know, you like take them out to a nice meal. You're like, oh, did you enjoy it? I was like, oh, it's okay, but you know, it's not as good as the other place, or like, I could have done it better. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're just very negative. It's a generational thing. It's a generational thing. My grandparents were born in the early 1940s, in the middle of the war. So yeah, that's him. It's even a bit of a running joke in the family that he like can't pay a compliment to anybody. So that normally what he said is like, oh, that's not bad. But, so I lent him this book, he started reading it, and then the next day he said to me, oh yeah, that book that your friend wrote, that's all right. I've been reading it. I was like, what? I was like, what? That's all right. Like, to translate, that's all right means I really enjoyed that. That's amazing. And I was like, wow, that says a lot. So anyway, strong recommendation there from me. Okay, so just to finish up the video, I want to go into Crimson news. And a massive thank you to everybody, to all of my viewers who recently bought me a coffee on Ko-fi.com. If you're not aware, Ko-fi is a kind of donation platform that allows you to support content creators by buying them a coffee, which is essentially collecting a small donation through PayPal. And I did use your donations to buy some coffees, and just thank you so much. Honestly, it means a lot to me. Running the Crimson Stitchery takes a lot of time, it obviously incurs costs, and it's just so lovely of you guys to have literally bought me a coffee, which I spent on a coffee, and just take a moment out of my week to relax. And yeah, thank you so much. So some of you might have already watched the vlog that I recorded a few weeks ago when I visited the Chelsea Flower Show with my grandparents, and I hope that you enjoyed it. The people that watched it seem to have enjoyed it. It's quite short, so it's not going to take very much time. I'll put a link on screen at the end of this video. And I'd be quite interested to film some more vlogs because I often go out and about and visit some interesting things, and I'd also like to be taking some more footage outside. So I've decided to save up for a selfie stick, and I'd like to purchase quite a good quality selfie stick, you know, one that's not too flimsy and one that is quite flexible so that I can use it in different ways and use my phone to record footage. So I've set up a goal on my Ko-fi page to save up for a selfie stick. So if you would like to help support the Crimson Stitchery financially, your donation for the next few weeks will go towards saving up for a selfie stick, and then any surplus will either, you know, be a nice little treat for me or just continue to reinvest in the podcast. So again, thank you so much to everybody who bought me a coffee. It was so lovely. For those of you who don't want to do that, and you know, it's not obligatory, it's not compulsory in any way, because I have more than once been low income. A woman from my knitting group did recently say to me that she'd found my channel and she asked me, oh, are you enjoying doing it? Because you need to enjoy doing it. And it's true, I am enjoying doing it. But what we were chatting about was, in order to watch TV in the UK, you need to purchase a TV license. And if you want to do streaming, like, you could do it illegally, but really you need to purchase a subscription to Netflix or Amazon or whatever other platform it is that you watch. Sky is really expensive, for example. So, you know, you pay to watch television and you still get adverts, and obviously I've switched on the adverts on this YouTube channel, but the income from that is so nominal. It's like a few pounds per episode, so it's not very much at all. Whereas, you know, if you have the means and you would like to support the channel directly, that money is actually going to go straight away to me to invest in the channel to make it better. And also, I really welcome feedback that you have. Please, you know, constructive criticism. Obviously, don't tell me that I need to lose weight, like. And also I welcome feedback on the kind of videos that you'd like to see. So I do this podcast around about once a fortnight. It takes quite a long time to record it, and I would like to put out some smaller instructional videos that are helpful for you guys. So I'd love to know the kind of content that you'd like to see. So please do feel free to make suggestions. Also, I've been thinking for a little while that I would like to start writing a newsletter, because I quite enjoy writing and taking photographs, and I do quite a lot of that over on Instagram. But to be honest with you, I don't love Instagram as a platform. I find it quite ethically questionable in terms of how it collects data about its users. Obviously it's owned by Facebook, and they have had a lot of publicity in the news about how they have breached, you know, data protection laws and so on. So I'm very sympathetic for anyone who doesn't have an Instagram account and doesn't want one. So I've been thinking about writing a monthly newsletter instead. I've opened a thread up in the Crimson Stitchery Ravelry group specifically about the newsletter. So if you're interested in the newsletter and you have ideas about what you'd like to see featured, please do go over to the Ravelry thread and comment there specifically, because it's so helpful to have all of your wonderful ideas collated together in one specific place, as opposed to like a few comments on Instagram, a few comments on various different YouTube videos. It makes it very difficult to find and access. So in the newsletter, I'm calling it Postcards from the Crimson Stitchery, and I'm treating it as a postcard, like, you know, an image and some text either inspired by the image or what's going on. I'll also have some monthly favourites, probably some recommendations and tips, and there'll also be updates about any patterns that I decide to write or release, or any other kind of creative endeavours that I'm up to. But I'll only release it at the beginning of the month. I aim to do it on the first of the month. If I do more than one newsletter a month, it will probably be, you know, to notify you about new patterns or any, if I ever make any products or anything like that. So I'm not going to spam you, I'm not going to email you too much. So yeah, let me know what you think about that. I really welcome suggestions about content that you're interested in the newsletter, and head over to Ravelry to discuss that in more detail. Meanwhile, the sign up link for the first newsletter that will go out on the 1st of July is available below this video now. So yeah, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Crimson Stitchery. Let me know what you think about future videos, future plans, and a final thank you to everybody who has bought me a coffee on ko-fi.com. I'll see you again for another knitty chat in 2 weeks, and meanwhile, happy knitting. Bye bye.